The day my parents threw away my cupcakes was the day I decided I'd bake my own future. I still vividly remember the excitement I felt the first time I baked a perfect batch of cupcakes. I was 14, my hands slightly trembling as I gently placed the warm golden cupcakes on our kitchen table, the sweet aroma filling every corner of the room. This was more than just baking. It was proof that I, Anna, the overlooked younger sister, had something special too. Mom, Dad, look, I made cupcakes! My voice was bright with hope as I looked toward my parents expectantly. Mom barely glanced up from her phone, her attention still captured by some message or social post. That's nice, Anna. Make sure you clean up afterward, she murmured distractedly. Dad's eyes briefly moved from the newspaper he was reading, examining my cupcakes with a mixture of boredom and disdain. Cupcakes? He scoffed lightly. Anna, you're wasting your time. You should spend more effort on your studies, like your sister Sophie. Baking won't pay the bills. His dismissal cut through me like a blade. My gaze drifted to the refrigerator, where Sophie's latest straight-A report card proudly sat center stage, glowing under the kitchen lights like a trophy. I felt small, invisible, overshadowed as usual. My cupcakes remained untouched on the table, a silent rejection that mirrored my own feelings of inadequacy. Dinner that night was quiet, conversations always circling around Sophie's achievements, her high grades, her musical talent, her bright future in finance. Meanwhile, I faded quietly into the background, a shadow easily overlooked. Over the following days, I became more aware of how little I mattered in my own home. Sophie's awards and achievements filled our shelves, walls, and conversations. I was like wallpaper, always there, yet easily ignored. This silent treatment gradually taught me how to survive. I learned to stay quiet, to remain unseen, and to keep my dreams hidden. But deep inside, something refused to be extinguished. A quiet flame burned persistently, whispering that I deserved to be seen. On the evening before Sophie's high school graduation, I stood near the staircase, unintentionally overhearing my parents' hushed voices. Anna won't amount to anything, Dad murmured bitterly. She'll never measure up to Sophie. My mother sighed, a weary resignation in her voice. I know, but at least we have one daughter we can be proud of. Their words stung more deeply than I ever anticipated. Tears blurred my vision as I silently moved away, retreating to my bedroom. That night, driven by hurt and self-doubt, I quietly gathered all my baking tools and ingredients, ready to throw away every trace of my foolish dream. As I stood over the trash bin, my fingers tightened around the mixing bowl, and suddenly, something stopped me, a spark, defiant and strong. I paused, breathing deeply, feeling a fierce determination rise within me. Instead of tossing everything away, I gently placed the bowl back onto the counter. Then, opening a drawer, I carefully took out a worn, stained recipe card, the very first one I'd ever used. My eyes traced over its familiar handwriting, each ingredient, each step, filling me with warmth and certainty. I slipped it gently back into the drawer, safely hidden but never forgotten. Maybe my parents had already decided my future was hopeless, but at that moment I knew I wasn't ready to surrender. They might see me as invisible, but I would not let their perceptions define my worth. Little did they realize their rejection had ignited a determination in me, a quiet rebellion that would eventually shape my future, one cupcake at a time. College was supposed to be a fresh start, but for me, it felt like wearing clothes tailored for someone else. Uncomfortable, unnatural, and suffocating. Every morning I woke up, staring at the ceiling, convincing myself to keep going, repeating the mantra my parents had drilled into my head: stability, success, finance. On campus, the aroma of freshly baked bread and coffee often drifted from the small bakery across from my lecture hall. Each day, my steps would involuntarily slow as I passed it, a painful longing tightening my chest. Sometimes I allowed myself a brief pause, peeking through the glass windows at trays of pastries, cakes glistening under warm lights, a bittersweet reminder of dreams I'd locked away. Graduation day came quickly, a blurred memory of forced smiles and polite applause from my family. Sophie stood next to our parents, beaming confidently, now a rising star in finance, while I held my diploma, feeling hollow. I had fulfilled their expectations, yet I'd never felt so empty inside. Shortly after, I landed a respectable job at a prestigious accounting firm, exactly as planned. My parents were finally satisfied, proudly announcing my position at family gatherings. But to me, each day at the office felt increasingly unbearable, drowning in endless numbers, reports, and meetings about budgets and forecasts that meant nothing to me. Then, one ordinary afternoon, as I mechanically sorted through financial statements, my email chimed. The subject line instantly grabbed my attention. Looking for a baker, company gala. My heart leaped, then quickly sank. Baking wasn't part of my approved life plan. Yet my fingers, trembling slightly, clicked open the message, curiosity overpowering fear. The email described our company's upcoming gala, requesting volunteers to bake desserts for the event. My breathing quickened, thoughts racing wildly. Before my fears could take control, a surge of rebellion pushed me forward. Without allowing myself another second to reconsider, I typed a quick response, volunteering myself as the baker. The moment I clicked send, panic surged through me. "What have I done?" I whispered, eyes wide in disbelief at my impulsive choice. Yet beneath the anxiety, another feeling emerged, something I'd nearly forgotten: excitement. Seconds later, a reply flashed onto my screen. "We're thrilled, Anna. Can't wait to taste your creations." I stared at those simple words, feeling a flicker of hope. Perhaps this impulsive decision was the first step toward reclaiming a life that belonged truly to me. In the days leading up to the company gala, anxiety became my constant companion. My small apartment kitchen turned into an organized chaos of flour-dusted countertops, bowls filled with thick batter, and trays of experimental pastries lining every surface. Each batch I pulled from the oven brought a mixture of hope and dread. Would this be enough to impress, or would my long-hidden passion embarrass me in front of everyone? On the night before the event, exhaustion blurred my vision, yet determination pushed me onward. My fingers carefully placed delicate sugar flowers on the final layer of the cake, each petal shaped with precision and care. Stepping back, my heart raced with both pride and fear. This cake was my silent rebellion, my first true declaration of independence. The following evening, dressed in my best business attire, I walked into the gala ballroom, carefully balancing the large, meticulously decorated cake in my hands. Elegant chandeliers cast golden hues across tables set with white linens, crystal glasses shimmering like tiny stars. Voices and laughter filled the room, yet all I could hear was my own heartbeat. My boss noticed me first, eyes widening in admiration. "Anna, is this yours?" He gestured toward the cake, clearly impressed. "Yes," I replied softly, smiling nervously. Around us, colleagues gathered, murmuring appreciatively, eyes sparkling with anticipation. "You've been hiding your talents!" My boss laughed warmly, clapping a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Let's reveal your masterpiece to everyone." As we moved toward the center table, my eyes caught sight of a familiar figure entering the room. My stomach tightened instantly. Sophie had arrived, elegantly dressed, poised as always. She scanned the crowd until her gaze landed squarely on me. Surprise briefly flickered in her eyes, replaced quickly by an expression I couldn't quite decipher. With an uneasy feeling building, I focused on the presentation. My boss gently tapped his glass, drawing everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's dessert is a very special creation from our very own Anna, our hidden talent from the accounting department." Applause rippled through the room. My face warmed, heart swelling with unexpected pride. But before I could fully savor the moment, Sophie approached quietly, pulling my boss aside. Her whispered words were inaudible, but his expression immediately changed, from cheerful excitement to startled confusion. Fear tightened its grip around me. Had she come to sabotage me? My pulse quickened painfully as he turned back, his expression serious. "Anna, could we speak privately?" he asked gently, yet the concern in his voice was unmistakable. My colleagues exchanged worried glances as I followed him away from the crowd, dread building inside me. In the quiet corner, my boss hesitated briefly before speaking. "Sophie mentioned your parents don't know about your baking," he said carefully. "She implied you might not want to pursue this publicly. Is there truth to this?" My stomach churned with betrayal. Anger and confusion swirled together, yet through the chaos, clarity emerged. This was my moment, and I wouldn't let Sophie or anyone else control my narrative anymore. "No," I responded firmly, meeting his gaze directly. "My baking is exactly what I want people to see. It's who I truly am." He studied me closely for a moment, then smiled warmly, relief evident in his eyes. "Good, because this," he gestured toward my cake, now the center of everyone's attention, "is exceptional. The world deserves to see what you're capable of." As we returned to the celebration, applause echoed around me, louder this time, genuine and supportive. Sophie remained at the edge of the crowd, her expression unreadable. Yet at that moment, Despite lingering hurt and confusion, I stood tall, feeling genuinely seen for perhaps the first time in my life. Tonight marked the beginning not just of a new career, but of my decision to finally live life on my own terms, even if it meant confronting everything I'd been hiding from. The weeks following the gala felt like living two separate lives. At work, colleagues stopped by my desk daily, complimenting my baking and asking for recipes. Yet at home, silence stretched painfully between me and my family. Sophie's quiet sabotage at the gala lingered in my mind, leaving a bitter taste that overshadowed even my sweetest pastries. Then, one quiet Sunday afternoon, while arranging freshly baked muffins in my kitchen, my phone buzzed loudly against the countertop. My heart skipped painfully when I recognized the caller ID, Mom. Swallowing the knot of anxiety, I answered softly, "Hello? Anna, we need to talk." My mother's voice was distant, cold, filled with barely concealed disappointment. I drew in a shaky breath, bracing myself. "Okay. Your father and I spoke with Sophie. She told us everything, your little bakery stunt at the gala. We thought you had finally chosen a respectable path, Anna." My heart sank, the familiar feeling of inadequacy flooding back. Yet this time, anger simmered beneath it, quiet but defiant. "Mom, it wasn't a stunt. Baking is important to me. It makes me happy." "Happiness?" She scoffed softly. "You think happiness will pay bills, provide security? Your sister has real goals, Anna. She knows what's important." I gripped the countertop, knuckles whitening, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I have goals too, Mom. They're just different." A tense silence hung between us. Then, in an icy tone, she spoke again. "Your father and I discussed this carefully. You need to quit this baking nonsense immediately. Otherwise, we will no longer support you." Her ultimatum hit me hard, sharp as ice. My voice cracked slightly. "You'd cut me off because I'm pursuing something I love?" "No." Her voice grew softer, colder. "We're doing it because we care. One day, you'll understand." She ended the call abruptly. Silence echoed painfully in my small apartment, pressing heavily upon me. That night, I sat alone in darkness, the warm glow of streetlights seeping through my curtains. Tears stung my eyes, but beneath the pain, a quiet resolve solidified. For the first time, I clearly saw how conditional my parents' love truly was. The next morning, exhausted yet determined, I walked into my boss's office. He glanced up, surprised. "Anna, what brings you here?" Taking a deep breath, my words rushed out, honest and vulnerable. "I need to do something real with my baking. I can't keep hiding it. Could you help me set up a small space at our next charity event?" His expression brightened instantly. "Absolutely. But Anna," he paused carefully, "are you sure you're ready for this?" I met his eyes, calm settling deep within me. More than ever. From that moment, my days became split between accounting tasks and passionate baking experiments. My small kitchen filled once again with joy, the fragrance of cinnamon, vanilla, and chocolate blending into something hopeful. Each creation felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Yet amid this newfound clarity, uncertainty lingered. On late nights, lying awake, doubt whispered persistently, what if my parents were right? What if this path only led to disappointment? The weekend of the charity event finally arrived. Standing behind my modest stall, carefully arranged with delicate pastries and cakes, anxiety mixed with cautious optimism. As attendees passed by, sampling treats, their smiles of delight filled me with warmth. Suddenly, a familiar figure approached. Sophie. My breath hitched nervously. She stopped before my booth, eyes carefully scanning my offerings. "They're beautiful," she said softly, her voice surprisingly sincere. "You know, Mom and Dad didn't mean what they said. They just worry about you." Her words felt rehearsed, hollow. A surge of frustration welled up. "They worry because I'm different, Sophie, because I won't follow their script. It's not concern, it's control." Sophie flinched slightly, visibly uncomfortable. "Anna, I'm just trying to help. Then why sabotage me?" My voice trembled, confronting the hurt directly. "Why whisper doubts to my boss? Why not support me openly?" Her eyes flickered downward, revealing a vulnerability I'd never seen. "Because you're braver than I am. You always have been. You're willing to risk it all for what makes you happy, and I envy that. I've always envied it." The raw honesty in her admission stunned me into silence. For the first time, I saw my sister clearly, not as the enemy, but as someone just as trapped by our parents' expectations. The anger inside me softened. Sophie, maybe it's not too late, I offered gently, extending a pastry toward her. She hesitated, then carefully took a bite. Watching the genuine smile appear on her face felt like hope blooming in an unexpected place. As she walked away, I knew my journey was far from over. But now, a new possibility existed, one where Sophie wasn't my rival, but perhaps an unexpected ally in finding the strength to create lives we truly desired. After the charity event, Sophie's confession lingered heavily in my thoughts. Her unexpected honesty shook the foundations of resentment I had carefully built over the years. Seeing vulnerability in the sister I'd always perceived as perfect forced me to reconsider the narrative I'd lived by. Yet, beneath this shift lay an unsettling loneliness, a stark reminder of how isolated I'd become from the very people I called family. Weeks passed, and while my bakery endeavors slowly gained attention, the silence from my parents remained deafening. Each day was a balancing act between joy from pursuing my passion and the lingering ache of their rejection. Then, one particularly stormy evening, as I closed the bakery and locked the door behind me, my phone lit up, displaying a name I'd almost stopped expecting to see: Dad. My heartbeat quickened as I answered cautiously, bracing for confrontation. Anna. His voice sounded unusually strained, distant. We need to talk. 1,000 emotions surged inside me, yet I managed to speak calmly. What is it? There was a brief hesitation before his voice came through again, sharper this time. Your mother is sick. She's in the hospital and she asked to see you. My chest tightened painfully, panic and guilt twisting together. What happened? Is she all right? Just come, he said shortly before hanging up abruptly, leaving me with more questions than answers. I rushed through the rain-soaked streets toward the hospital, my mind racing. The sterile smell, the pale lighting, the cold echoes of footsteps in empty hallways, all heightened my dread as I stepped inside. My father stood near the door of my mother's hospital room, his expression unreadable, offering no words of comfort. Entering the dimly lit room, I saw Mom lying quietly, eyes closed, her usually composed face pale and vulnerable. Sophie sat silently beside her, looking exhausted. My presence stirred Mom awake, her gaze instantly locking onto mine, intense yet uncertain. Anna, she whispered weakly, you came. Of course I came, Mom, I replied gently, moving closer, heart racing with a mix of worry and hope. Perhaps this painful moment would finally bring clarity and reconciliation. Yet her next words shattered that fragile hope. We wouldn't be here if you'd listened to us. All the stress you've caused, fighting against everything we taught you. How could you be so selfish? Her words struck me harder than I'd anticipated. Despite everything, I had still expected compassion or at least some understanding. Instead, even now, blame was her instinctive response. I'm sorry you feel that way, I replied quietly, my voice shaking slightly. But I won't apologize for being myself anymore. You still don't get it, my father interrupted coldly from behind. We raised you better than this. Family comes first. I stood frozen, heart aching, torn between guilt and anger. Sophie, silent until now, suddenly spoke up, her voice steady yet firm. No, Dad, you raised us to chase your dreams, not ours. That's not love, it's control. Anna was brave enough to reject that, something I wish I'd done sooner. My father stared at Sophie in disbelief, speechless. My mother's eyes widened slightly, confused and hurt. Silence blanketed the room, thick and charged. I reached out, squeezing Sophie's hand gently, drawing strength from her newfound support. Then, turning to my parents, I spoke softly but with quiet resolve. I'm sorry Mom is sick, truly. But her illness isn't my fault. It's not Sophie's either. Maybe it's time you both saw us for who we are. Not extensions of your ambitions, but your daughters with our own dreams, fears, and desires. Mom stared back at me, eyes glistening yet still silent. Dad turned away, the tension in his shoulders evident, unwilling or perhaps unable to respond. Stepping outside into the stormy night, Sophie and I stood silently together, raindrops mixing with quiet tears. Our shared pain had finally united us against the years of misunderstanding. But despite this new bond, uncertainty remained heavy between us. I realized then that a family wasn't always about shared blood, but shared respect, acceptance, and genuine support, something we were still far from finding with our parents. That night, alone in my darkened apartment, I baked quietly until dawn, each pastry a silent prayer for strength, healing, and the courage to continue forging a path uniquely my own. In the aftermath of the hospital confrontation, my world seemed to fracture into 1,000 scattered pieces. Every interaction replayed painfully in my mind. My mother's harsh words, my father's disappointment, Sophie's unexpected courage. The bakery was thriving, yet inside, I was unraveling slowly, struggling with guilt, sadness, and confusion. One evening, exhausted from another long day, I stood quietly behind the bakery counter, staring blankly at the dimmed display case. The shop was closed, yet my heart felt just as empty as those trays behind the glass. Just as I began tidying up, the gentle chime of the door startled me. Turning around, my breath caught sharply. Sophie stood hesitantly at the entrance, drenched from the pouring rain outside, eyes tired but determined. "Anna, I'm sorry to just show up like this," she began softly, avoiding my gaze. I didn't know where else to go." My immediate reaction was guarded, cautious. "Sophie, I'm exhausted. If this is another attempt to—" "No," she interrupted quickly, desperation clear in her voice. "Please, just hear me out." Something about her tone softened my defenses. Reluctantly, I nodded, gesturing her toward a small table in the corner. She sat down heavily, shoulders slumped, eyes rimmed red from exhaustion. "Anna," she started, voice wavering, "I quit my job." I stared, stunned. "You quit? Why? I thought that was everything you wanted, everything Mom and Dad wanted for you." "That's exactly why I quit," she whispered bitterly, finally looking at me, eyes rimmed with tears. "All my life I've chased their dreams, never my own. Watching you stand up to them, seeing you fight for your passion, it broke something inside me. Or maybe it woke me up." She took a shaky breath, brushing tears aside impatiently. "I realized I'd spent my whole life trying to make them proud. But nothing I ever did felt good enough. Then, when Mom got sick and they blamed you, something snapped in me too. I realized they don't care who we are, only who they want us to be." My heart softened as her words settled deeply inside me. I saw my own reflection clearly in her pain, her exhaustion. "I didn't know you felt this way," I whispered gently, stepping around the counter and guiding her toward a chair. "How could you?" She smiled weakly, tears still spilling. "I spent years making sure no one did." We sat quietly in the half-lit bakery, pastries and muffins forgotten around us, as years of misunderstanding slowly unraveled into shared vulnerability. After a moment, Sophie spoke softly again. "Anna, how did you find the strength to follow your own path, even when everyone rejected you?" I smiled faintly, thinking of all the nights I spent baking silently, each cake and pastry helping me reclaim myself. Honestly, I was scared every step of the way. But being myself, really myself, meant more than their approval. She nodded slowly, absorbing my words. "I want that too. I want to feel free, even if that means losing everything I've always known." "You won't lose everything," I said firmly, gently squeezing her hand. "You still have me." We sat quietly in that comfortable silence, both finally understanding the depth of our shared struggles. The air in the bakery felt lighter, softer, somehow warmer. Sophie reached out, picking up a muffin from the display, smiling gently. "Maybe your pastries really are magic, Anna." I laughed softly, feeling genuine joy bloom in my chest. "Maybe the magic was always there," I said, looking around at the bakery I'd built despite all the odds. "We just had to be brave enough to see it." As Sophie stood to leave, she hesitated by the door, turning back one last time. "Anna, do you think they'll ever understand us?" I sighed, shaking my head slightly, heart aching but determined. "I don't know. Maybe someday. But right now, we have to understand ourselves first." Sophie nodded, her expression lighter, freer. She stepped outside, disappearing into the night. Alone again, I looked around my small bakery, breathing deeply, feeling an unexpected sense of clarity. Our paths weren't easy or perfect, yet they were uniquely ours. And maybe for now, that was enough. After that rainy night when Sophie and I finally broke through years of misunderstanding, something subtle yet profound began shifting within me. Life didn't suddenly become perfect, far from it, but I started feeling lighter, as if a heavy fog had finally begun to lift. At first, reconnecting with Sophie felt like cautiously stepping onto thin ice. We met once a week, usually at my bakery after closing. Initially, our conversations were hesitant and guarded, carefully avoiding topics that touched too close to our family's lingering shadows. But soon, Those cautious coffee dates turned into genuine conversations filled with laughter, tears, and unexpected honesty. One evening, as soft jazz music filled the quiet corners of my bakery, Sophie gazed around, her eyes warm with admiration. You know, Anna, this place feels exactly like you. Warm, inviting, comforting. I never realized how much courage it took for you to build all this alone. Her words, simple yet sincere, caught me off guard. A lump formed in my throat as I poured her another cup of coffee. It wasn't courage at first, I admitted quietly. Mostly fear of never being enough, fear that Mom and Dad were right. She reached across the table, squeezing my hand gently. I think we both carried their voices inside our heads for far too long. Silence settled between us, peaceful rather than heavy. Outside, cars passed by slowly, their headlights painting streaks of gentle light across the bakery windows. Sophie broke the quiet again, this time softly, hesitantly. Have you considered talking to Mom and Dad again? My heart tightened instinctively. I looked down, tracing patterns on the wooden table. Honestly, I've thought about it, but every time I do, I feel like that same helpless teenager again, desperate for their approval. Sophie nodded, understanding. Maybe we never fully outgrow that. But Anna, maybe we don't have to. Maybe healing means accepting they might never understand, and that's okay. I met her gaze, surprised by the wisdom in her words. This wasn't the Sophie I remembered, always poised and perfect. This was someone entirely different, someone who had faced her own darkness and emerged stronger, humbler. You're right, I whispered finally. I spent years believing their acceptance would somehow validate my existence. But now I realize the only person whose acceptance I need is mine. A gentle smile curved Sophie's lips. Exactly. Anna, we don't have to keep waiting for their approval to feel complete. Look at us now. We found something even stronger. For a brief moment, quiet tears blurred my vision, but this time they were tears of relief, release, and hope. I felt deeply grateful to finally share this clarity with the sister I'd spent years misunderstanding. Days turned into weeks, and slowly I began incorporating small acts of self-care and self-compassion into my routine, taking time for walks, journaling, even joining a support group for others with complicated family histories. Each small act was a deliberate step toward reclaiming my sense of worth, independent of anyone else's validation. Yet just as my newfound peace began settling comfortably around me, my phone lit up one afternoon with an unexpected name, Dad. My stomach tightened, fear instinctively clawing upward, but beneath that initial panic I recognized a new, quiet strength rising to meet it. Taking a deep breath, I answered calmly, ready this time to face whatever waited on the other end of the line. My father's voice came through clearly, yet somehow older, wearier. Anna, he began slowly, pausing as if each word took effort. I suppose you're surprised to hear from me. I am, I admitted cautiously, steadying my breath, readying myself emotionally for whatever came next. He sighed deeply, a sound filled with vulnerability I'd rarely heard from him. Things haven't been easy since you and Sophie left. Your mother has recovered physically, but... He paused again, clearly struggling. Emotionally, we're realizing how much we may have pushed you both away. His confession, unexpected and sincere, sent a tremor through my heart. I felt a small spark of hope, but beneath it lay years of hurt and mistrust. Dad, I appreciate you reaching out, I said softly, choosing each word carefully. But trust takes time to rebuild. For so long, Sophie and I have carried the weight of your expectations. We need space to discover who we really are without that burden. I understand, he replied quietly, regret heavy in his tone. I just wanted you to know that we've realized our mistakes. We were wrong. Tears filled my eyes, but this time they weren't from hurt. They came from a bittersweet relief, an acknowledgement I'd long hoped for but never truly expected. Yet something inside me remained cautious, protective of the boundaries I'd worked so hard to build. Thank you for saying that, Dad. It means a lot. I paused, gathering courage before continuing. But right now, healing for me and Sophie means setting healthy boundaries. Maybe someday things can change, but right now, this distance is important for all of us. I respect that, he said softly. Just know we're here, whenever you're ready. Ending the call, I sat quietly, absorbing the weight of what had just happened. My father's acknowledgement didn't erase past wounds, yet it felt like the first genuine step toward possible healing, on terms that respected my newfound self-worth. Weeks passed, and while life at the bakery continued to blossom, something profound had shifted inside me. Sophie and I stood side by side at the bakery's newest location on its grand opening day, sunlight flooding the room, laughter and warmth filling the space. Just as we prepared to cut the ribbon, Sophie squeezed my hand gently. "Anna, look how far we've come." My eyes scanned the crowd, lingering briefly, instinctively, hoping to catch a glimpse of our parents. But they weren't there. Yet, strangely, that emptiness didn't hurt as it once had. Instead, I felt calm acceptance, genuine peace in recognizing our worth was no longer measured by their presence or approval. I smiled back at Sophie, nodding with newfound clarity. "You're right. And maybe for now, it's enough just knowing we've built something real, something entirely ours." Together we cut the ribbon, cheers erupting around us. Surrounded by those who truly cared, I realized that family didn't necessarily mean sharing blood. It meant choosing love, understanding, and genuine support. As the celebration continued, Sophie laughed, her happiness contagious. I stepped back briefly, savoring the moment, imperfect, yet profoundly beautiful in its truth. We hadn't achieved a flawless ending, but rather a real, hopeful beginning. And standing there, watching Sophie joyfully share pastries with our friends, I finally understood. We didn't need perfection, we simply needed the courage to live authentically, embracing the messy, beautiful reality we'd created together.